Test.
Of the size. First of all, on my far right, I keep turning around. That is Dan Mogulof right there. He is the Assistant Vice Chancellor for UC Berkeley, and he's been at Cal since 2004, which is quite a while. Prior to coming to Berkeley, Dan was a producer and bureau chief for CBS News for 12 years. Big shout out for CBS News there. He also worked for PBS. I do these calls actually nothing. And he sold heroin for 7 years. And he's with New York Times Digital as well as PBS. He's a graduate of Columbia University, which, for those of you not familiar, is not in Columbia. It's in New York. Anything for New York? Nothing. And he got a degree in poli-sci. Nearest to me in the hat here, this is Harvey Smith. Harvey is president of the People's Park Historic District Advocacy. Let me try it once again. President of the People's Park Historic District Advocacy Group.
Yeah.
He's taught middle school and high school. He's the author of Berkeley and the New Deal, and is a project advisor to the Living New Deal Project. Did I get that right? He is an advisor to the Living New Deal and president of the National New Deal Preservation Association. He's also worked as a union carpenter, a public health worker, radio journalist, and horse rancher. He's a graduate of this very school. He received a BA in English and a master's in public health. I flipped the coin earlier. Dan is going to go first. When we do these forums, each speaker speaks for like 10 to 15 minutes, then we open it up for your questions. And are you holding your phone? What is it? Yeah. Food? Did you bring some for the whole class? Didn't your mom teach you? All right, please welcome. Again, this is Dan Mogulof right here.
Afternoon. Thanks for having me in. Thanks for your interest. I'm not going to go all the way back in terms of the history of the people process, and you know about really the crucial role it played in this city's history.
Do you want a mic?
I don't know. Do I need one? In the back? You guys hear me in the back now? Cool. But I'm going to really jump to 2017, which is where things got started in terms of what's happening in the park today, not just in the park, all around the city of Berkeley. What happened in 2017 is they formed a housing commission because UC Berkeley, as it turns out, offers less housing than every other campus in the UC system. We are 8,000 beds short of being able to guarantee every freshman 2 years of university housing, and every transfer student and every graduate student a guarantee of 1 year of housing. Those are standard offers. Those are minimal requirements. And one of the reasons it's so important to be able to offer students housing, you guys know this better than I, it's really about equity of experience. It's really hard to get the most out of the university experience if you're not living in close proximity to the campus. We have currently 25% of undergraduates who don't even live in this town. They have to commute, and it's an entirely different experience to them. So in 2017, Chancellor Chris set the goal that we were going to put in motion projects to increase the number of beds in university housing can offer to students by 8,000 beds. And to do that, we would need to build on every single piece of university-owned property that almost all of them have current uses, but every piece of property where we could take the current use and either adapt it, change it, or work with it. We could have, and it's really important, I think, we could have, insofar as People's Park is concerned, said, look, this is university-owned property. This is a perfect location for student housing. We're going to take all 2.8 acres, and we're going to build housing there for thousands and thousands and thousands of students. Chancellor didn't want to do that. Didn't have to be a winner-take-all. Didn't have to be a project that was going to serve one part of the community. And so what she decided was, first and foremost, say 2/3 of the park is open space. Then, with the remaining third, divide it. Part of that parcel for new student housing, 1,000 students, will be in the new building that will be constructed there. And then the university is donating another portion of that land, worth $8 million, for the nonprofit construction of what's called supportive housing. That's a full-service environment for either extremely low-income individuals and families, or formerly unhoused, or currently unhoused people. And finally, the fourth key, inherent, integral part of the project was to do something that's never been done, which was to commemorate the park's past, its legacy, its history, its importance. The chancellor felt that the park and the state it was in then, and to this day, is not consistent with the values and ideals that informed all that happened in the park in the 1960s. And to create a place that would be open for the public, to create a place that would provide housing for formerly unhoused and very low-income people, to create a place where 1,000 students could come in out of the brutal Berkeley rental market for university housing, and to create a place of commemoration represented the rarest of rare public projects, and that was a win-win-win-win-win for the public, for students, for unhoused people, and for all in this community. And I'm one of them. I'm also a resident of Berkeley who care deeply about the park's past and its legacy and believe it should not be forgotten. The chancellor believed that that project could not be more consistent with the ideals and the legacy of the park. So, as you may know, construction has been paused. We attempted to start last September or late last August. Unfortunately, there were people there who took law into their own hands. They broke through, barricades were there. They did $1.5 million in damage to construction equipment that was there. Many of them were high school students. And then shortly after, we were told by the court that we needed to wait. This was the appeals court. We had been sued to stop the project, as we have been sued to stop every single student housing project we've tried to start by people who say they want us to build housing. We'll talk more about that later. The case is now before the Supreme Court of California. Recently, as you may be aware, so the appellate court initially ruled, so we won a trial, and the trial verdict was overruled by the appellate court for two reasons. The first was the appellate court said, you guys are a form of pollution, that the noise you make as students is an environmental impact that the university failed to analyze as per the California Environmental Quality Act. That was new and unprecedented. The court also said that the university had failed to sufficiently analyze alternatives as required by the law to the People's Park site. The small problem with that for us, and obviously the court disagreed, is that we had already analyzed alternatives because there's an overarching environmental impact report for the university's long-range development plan. And so we had also already looked at alternatives. Beyond that, it's really important to know, they said, you should look at other sites. And we said, well, no, we're going to build on those sites too. Going back to how I began. We're going to get to 8,000 beds, we have to build on all of the property the university owns in close proximity to the campus. That ruling by the appellate court was so unprecedented that almost immediately there was an explosion of protest around the state, and not just from university administrators. This is at the heart of the housing crisis for California. This is the reason that so many of you have to go out into the market, because it's so damn hard to build housing in this state. And there were supportive editorials in the San Francisco Chronicle, in the Los Angeles Times, and the legislature woke up and they just passed a bill unanimously. Most of the time that happened in this country, it's almost like China. Republicans and Democrats agreed as one to change the law and say, not to exempt the university from the California Environmental Quality Act, but to say, if you've already looked at alternatives in your long-range development plan, you don't have to do that again. You can make your requirements. And number two, it said, no, I'm sorry. The social noise is not an environmental impact. And you know what? That was one of the things that wound people up across the state. Because suddenly, advocates for low-income housing, advocates for affordable housing said, here's a new tool for affluent neighborhoods to say, wait a second, these people who might be moving in, they make a lot of noise at their parties. And that's an environmental impact, and here we go, another impediment to this state doing what it needs to do so people can have a roof over their heads. We didn't stop there. We evolved because we listened to the community. And because of meetings we had with activists and meetings we had with experts in terms of how we care for and support unhoused people in this state, in this city, in this region, the chancellor made a commitment. We're not going to start building, she said, until we can provide housing and an alternative place to gather for the unhoused people living on the park. And the plan we developed, we didn't impose it. Graduate students went into the park day after day and talked to people and said, what do you want? How can we help? This university also has a full-time social worker, and we can't find any other university that does. His sole job is to provide for the needs and interests of unhoused people who are in and around the park now. He's found permanent housing for more than 125 people. We walk the walk. We have spent, along with the city of Berkeley and the state of California, $4.5 million so far. We built a new daytime gathering center with showers, with restrooms, with supportive services. We took a long-term lease on the roadway in. The people who had been sleeping in the park, everybody who wanted to, moved down there. Almost all of them have found permanent housing. And we're going to do the same thing to offer housing and supportive services when the way is clear for us to begin construction. It's part of what the chancellor believes is our responsibility as a good neighbor in this city. So I'm just going to leave it there for now because I don't want to be too presumptive about what your interests and questions, but I wanted to level up on the information. There are a lot of people who believe it should be all or nothing. This is a park that must be left as all open space. This is a park that can't be touched because that's the only way to commemorate past. This is a place that must be used entirely for student housing. And we say, no, it doesn't have to be that way. The last thing, this issue raises questions about how we make decisions in this society. We have unanimous votes by the state legislature. We have the backing of the mayor. We have the backing of the city council. We have the backing of Rigel Robinson, who represents this district. We have paid big money to do 2 independent surveys, random sample surveys of the student body at this university. And in both surveys, taken 6 months apart, a survey designed by faculty experts, not the administration, 2-to-1 students support this project. So at what point can we proceed? We're never going to get unanimity. We've worked through the democratic process. We've gauged what students want. We've had graduate students out in the park asking unhoused people what they need and want. And we have responded with modification of plans and an expenditure of millions and millions and millions of dollars. I think it's a pretty goddamn good project. And we believe it will benefit all once we can begin construction, and we think that day is coming pretty soon. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Very good to be here today. Can you hear me in the back? Good. Okay. Surprisingly, this is the first pro and con on people's part on this campus. This whole process, as Diane explained, has been going on for well over 5 years. Back in the day, we used to hold teach-ins on campus when we had important issues to discuss. Somehow, we don't do that anymore. I hope that maybe this is the start of a new tradition.
I'll be back.
As a 2-time graduate of this university and a former Cal employee and the parent of a PhD graduate, it really pains me when this university behaves badly. It did so over 60 years ago with People's Park, and unfortunately that continues today. Perhaps you're aware of the recent release of a new book, The Scandal of Cal, by Dr. Tony Platt, which documents in detail many misdeeds of our school from its inception. Its subtitle indicates a long history of land grabs, white supremacy, and miseducation. The book touches on Cal's complicity in the military-industrial complex, also portrayed in the recent film Oppenheimer. Another critique is included in journalist Jennifer Washburn's book, University Inc., describing the market model university. Christopher Newfield, former UCSB professor, penned a book called The Great Mistake: How We Wreck Public Universities and How We Can Fix Them. The very Baldwin, professor at Trinity College in Connecticut, spoke here last year to show how the tenets of his book, In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower, How Universities Are Plundering Our Cities, apply to our situation here in Berkeley. I point out these resources to show that although we may be proud to attend the world's greatest public university, our institution is not without faults, and many times it makes grave errors that are academically, socially, and financially costly. Now to the topic of People's Park. As an undergrad, and this will surely date me, I vaguely remember a block of houses and apartments east of Telegraph Avenue between Haste and Dwight. Because these properties were under threat of eminent domain by the university, they were a bit shabby. This was the low-rent district occupied by students, hippies, artists, and musicians. Some say this is why the block was targeted for development. By winter of 1968, I remember the muddy ad hoc parking lot that became, that the block became after the university cleared all the houses. By April of 1969, community members were tired of seeing the mess and decided, in the communitarian spirit of the time, to create a park on the eyesore that was that block. This was the 1960s, a period of activism for civil rights and against the war in Vietnam. There was also a counterculture that emerged here in the Bay Area and in other urban centers in the US, in England and France, and in many other places. Then came the backlash, spearheaded by Governor Reagan, who had vowed to clean up the mess at Berkeley. His cleanup method involved killing one bystander and permanently injuring many others. The National Guard was called in and erected a fence around the park. And its new turf, plants, and structures were destroyed. Jump ahead to 1972, and an anti-war rally turned into an opportunity to tear down the fence and rebuild the park. Since then, it has remained a gathering place for recreation, music, poetry, theater, and political rallies. For more details, check out the book, The Battle for People's Park by Tom Dalzell, that traces the first year of the park's history, and People's Park Still Blooming by Terry Compost, that traces the park's history from '69 forward. These books are among the many resources that our organization, People's Park Historic District Advocacy Group, used to prepare our application to place People's Park on the National Register of Historic Places. This application was unanimously approved about 2 years ago by the State Historical Resources Commission and sent to the National Park Service for final approval. Chancellor Chris and Dan Mogulof have not once recognized the park as a National Historic Site on the National Register. So after the UC Regents approved the People's Park Housing Project based on a very flawed environmental impact report, or EIR, we pursued a lawsuit under the California Environmental Quality Act, also known as CEQA. Our lawsuit was successful at the Court of Appeal, but has been appealed, as Dan said, to the California Supreme Court. In Tony Platt's blog from earlier this year, he describes how over the past 3 years, he has been, quote, trying to understand how a university that brands itself an advocate of social justice sidesteps any controversial issues that might disrupt inspirational narratives marketed to prospective students and alumni. Its public relations strategy relies on tactics honed in corporate boardrooms and political think tanks. Let me give you some examples. In the past 5 years, since the university announced plans to develop housing on the park, and particularly since the COVID epidemic, the homeless were allowed to camp in the park. Cal played benevolent in doing this while simultaneously disparaging the encampment and scaring students about the scary place that was supposed to be People's Park. The public relations myth promulgated by UCB is that the destruction of the park is the only way to revitalize it. Do they take us to be so naive that we believe that an institution that has run 3 national nuclear laboratories cannot maintain in beautiful condition a 2.8-acre park? Another myth from the Cal Communications Department is that People's Park is the epicenter of crime in Berkeley. To dispel this fiction, we studied the first 6 months of 2022 using a website called Crime Mapping that aggregates data from police departments. What we found was that in a 20-block area surrounding People's Park, the park accounted for 6% of crimes. In other words, 94% of crime in the neighborhood occurred outside the park. We submitted this information in a document to the Court of Appeal. Following our CEQA win in court, Dan was quoted as saying, "The victory amounts to treating students as pollution," as he just said, in describing the social noise argument. Although the university has had to deal with noise with Berkeley neighbors, and the city itself has a noise ordinance. Suddenly, this issue was being framed as a pejorative slogan that was quickly parroted by the media and the legislators. We reframed this slogan as students as lab rats, because taking any open space from the south side, Berkeley's most densely populated neighborhood, will violate every standard for urban green space, from the international to the national to the state to the local. Southside needs more open space, not less. Another point promulgated by Dan was that our group was composed of privileged NIMBY neighbors, which could not be further from the truth. Endorsers and supporters of our group are from all over Berkeley, California, and the U.S. They include UCB professors, 3 former Berkeley mayors, 3 former Berkeley City Council members, many former Berkeley commissioners, Cal alumni and students, attorneys, architects, historians, and many others that value People's Park. In all, the endorsers and supporters total over 250 people, plus others that have donated. So probably we know the names of 300 people. This is not a neighborhood group. The recently passed AB 1307, which represents the epitome of special interest legislation, is designed to circumvent the pending litigation before the California Supreme Court. The author, Assemblywoman Buffy Wicks, has never communicated with the plaintiffs, most of whom are her constituents. This certainly is an aberration of the democratic process, where normally opposing sides of an issue get a hearing and consideration of their concerns. There was no contact between the legislature and those of us that were concerned about the park. None. So that's why it flew through the legislature. UCB has identified and studied 13 locations for student housing that would avoid the negative impacts of the proposed project on People's Park. There's a path forward for Cal to build much needed student and supportive housing. The draft EIR table 3-2 shows clearly Cal has the ability to reach its housing goals without destroying People's Park. It has more, in that document, there are more proposed beds than the university plans to build, despite what Dan says about trying to build in every space. Secret challenges like ours do little to block development in California, which is clearly evident in Berkeley's recent housing boom and the well-researched 2023 report by the Rose Foundation, sequenced by the numbers, myths, and facts. Both the city of Berkeley and Cal celebrate the free speech and 60s history of the Telegraph Avenue corridor. They are among the reasons visitors from all parts of the globe are drawn to Berkeley. Recognizing People's Park for the asset that it is, and then preserving and enhancing it, can only add to its value as a treasured Berkeley attraction. Now, Dan said that the university was going to be good and not building on all the park. Well, actually, there's a creek that runs through part of the park, so I'm not even sure it's feasible to build on all of it. And it's interesting, this aspect of the university commemorating the park. It's kind of like the fox commemorating the lately departed chickens, right? UC was the only, or the State Historical Resources Commission received only one letter in opposition to putting the park on the National Register. That was from UC. So here they want to commemorate what they didn't want to really have commemorated. So go follow. Dan talked about the destruction in the park, but he didn't mention that the university came in there in a very brief window, because it had a court order not to do anything in the park, and clear cut bunches of trees. The Fred Cody Memorial Grove and many others, heritage trees that had been there even before the park. That's why people swarmed the park, and I saw them there. It didn't look like high school students to me. It looked like a lot of students from this campus. This protest that Dan talked about. Well, there's a lot of people that don't like the California Environmental Quality Act. It's oil companies, it's real estate investors, it's real estate developers. They don't like any regulation at all. And if you look at that Rose Foundation report, you'll see that CEQA has little impact on development. Surveys Dan talked about, the supposedly public support, they were criticized in the daily cap. So there's just a lot of issues around the park that have never been aired on this campus. And like I said, I'm very happy to be here today, and I really look forward to your questions. And before you leave, I have a little something for everybody. Pick up a poster by actually very nationally known artist. Yeah. I'm good. I got it. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so it's time for your questions. Anything you want to ask, or you start right here?
So there was a lot of conversation about different projects that could be proposed and different feasible projects for the university. So can you both go into detail about these other proposed projects and why or why, like specifically in the ones that we aren't planning on building on, why we haven't, if that makes sense?
Go into detail, meaning 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah, short answers.
So, I'm not sure which sites Harvey was referring to. There were certain sites in the environmental impact report that we analyzed that aren't suitable because they have current uses. For example, where the fields and gardens are over on Oxford. But Anchor House is one of them. That's going up right now. Down at Bancroft is another, right at the corner of Bancroft and Oxford. That's my office. It's going away. They're going to be putting student housing there. We're looking at, I don't remember all of the names, where the parking garages and the tennis courts down there. So all of those are in the works. We've got to find a new place for the parking. We've got to find a new place for the tennis court. They will all be built on and developed. Every single one of them. Did I answer your question?
Okay, all the way in the back. Let's go with Hood first.
Thanks. My question is about Emery, about the park. Would you be able to build on top of the park and do fixtures within the park and creating the different developments that we're talking about? Is that what we're talking about? Would that make them happy or no?
I'm sorry. I'm not understanding what you're asking.
Building on top of the park and leaving the park as it is.
We're building on the park. It's 2.8 acres. Just under 0.8 acres would be used for the supportive housing for extremely low-income people and for student housing, and the rest will be open green space. Did I answer your question? What's that?
Singapore, they build things, they make sure there's space for the public in every building that they build. Would that be an option?
So we, as a matter of policy, residential halls, because of safety and security, are not open to the public. The park and the open space will most definitely be open to the public.
Yeah, I'd like to. The point that I was making is that whatever you see in the south side now, just expect there are going to be many, many more people there. And as I said, there are standards for urban open space. And the university is violating all of them. You know, the World Health Organization on down. And the fact is that when you live in a very cramped urban environment, you need open space. What I try to point out, and you can look at that chart, and you can count the beds. There are more beds in the proposed, in the proposals than the university needs. If you look at that chart, what the university proposed doesn't need the People's Park beds. It can move the People's Park project just a block away to the parking structure that is earthquake unsafe. You guys are going to need that space there, believe me. And it was controversial, the fact that people were there during the pandemic. But during a pandemic, students also need a place, outdoor space. Fire is an ever-present danger. You know, earthquakes. So for those of you that have never experienced an earthquake, believe me, if you're up in a dorm and it starts to shake, Yeah, you don't want to stand under it, you don't want to be in it, you want to be in an open space. That park is needed, believe me.
So Harvey, we are building on that space. And could you just name, so you're suggesting that we've designated spaces that can be built on, that we don't plan to build on. Could you name one of those?
That you don't, no.
You say that we analyze sites to build student housing that we don't plan to use for student housing. Can you name one of those?
No, that's not what I said. But what I said was that, Dan, look at table 3-2.
I understand that, but tell me we're building on everything.
No, yeah. When are you going to build on everything is the question.
A lot of hands up, so it's great. A lot of interest.
Just to clarify, speak further on
We're not sure. I'll acknowledge, right. So the question was about our refusal, supposed refusal to acknowledge that it's a national historical landmark. We acknowledge it. I mean, absolutely. No, we didn't think it was necessary, and it doesn't preclude construction on the site. It doesn't change anything, but absolutely. So we have working on the commemoration one of this country's greatest architects, landscape architects, who happens to be a member of our faculty, Walter Hood. He has done incredible work in East Oakland and in urban areas across the country. Look him up. This is going to be a public process. We're inviting people. We've reached out to Harvey. We've reached out to others. Come work with us together to do that commemoration. So we acknowledge 100%. It's an important place. It's why we're going to be spending a lot of time and a lot of money for the commemoration that heretofore has never existed.
On the aisle.
I have a question for Ben. So, I had a question about the projects outside of People's Park. So there's two pretty big abandoned buildings in Clark Kerr. Do you guys have plans to demolish those and build?
We would love, so the question was, what about the buildings on Clark Kerr? Development of Clark Kerr, first of all, we've been sued by some of the same people who support the People's Parks to actually reduce the capacity of Clark Kerr, but we have signed a covenant, the university signed a covenant, and I think it's good until 2030, 2035. We can't add any students to Clark Kerr as per that covenant, but we'd love to. In the meantime, it's not bad open space.
There.
Question for Harvey. If with the proposed project, 2/3 of the space would still be People's Park, why is that not what is compromised?
It's what I said earlier. You need every inch and more of open space, but there's no more open space. That's it, People's Park. So that's why when the university has other options, and if anyone can find us online, go to the draft environmental impact report, look for table 3-2 and count up proposed beds. When the university's goal, what I've heard Dan and I guess the chancellor say, they want to build out 10,000 beds. So there's more than that's in there. You don't need, we can have both the park and we can have student housing. We're totally in favor of student housing.
Guy in the back. Here, yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, did you say in the 20-block radius of, it's only 6% of the crimes within there? Is that, in the 20-block radius, only
Yeah.
6% of the crime? Well, I ran the numbers a little bit, and a 20-block radius is 1,000 overall blocks. That's an incredibly disproportionate amount of crime committed at People's Park compared to the area that you mentioned. That's if I had to guess, 5-8 times the amount of crime happening there, proportional to the size.
Well, you can go to the website, you can do it yourself. I mean, our data is from over a year ago. So go to crime mapping and pinpoint People's Park or pinpoint any area, and you can draw the area you want to cover, and it'll give you the data.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with the data. I'm just saying that data looks bad on People's Park.
I just want to add one thing. There's one thing you said, Harvey, that really hit me kind of hard, that the chancellor has disparaged the unhoused people in the park. So I actually draft all of her messages before we send them out, and she makes them her own. We've done nothing like that. In fact, we have said, and it's one of the tragedies of the park, the victims of the crime there tend to be the unhoused people there. So far from disparaging, we think we can do better as a society than giving people a piece of dirt to sleep on in a dangerous area. That's why we've spent $5 million so far.
What I said, Dan, is that the park was disparaged. I didn't.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Go ahead.
I have a question.
Louder.
I have a question for Dan. You mentioned that the off-campus students don't get to have the same experiences on campus as well as they commute. Would you happen to know what the average commute is for these students that are off campus?
I don't have a time, but I don't have an exact time, but the 25% of undergraduates who don't live in the city of Berkeley are sort of on the edges of Oakland, Albany, El Cerrito. The last I saw, and it may have changed because of the way buses and schedules have changed since COVID, was about a half hour to get here. But and particularly for transfer students who are coming into the university as juniors and want to feel as part of the community, not being able to walk, as soon as that becomes a bit of a chore to get to the university after hours, extracurriculars, it's a whole different ballgame.
Wouldn't you say that Cal is offering something with the BART offers, not the BART, I'm sorry, buses, we have free.
Absolutely. But this is what students tell us, and we've done a lot of surveys. And what students tell us and it's not everybody, look, I'm not painting with a broad brush. You guys are diverse in your interests, your origins, your identities. We're not saying everybody has to live close to the university. You still have the freedom to choose. But what students tell us year after year is we want to live close.
Pat.
Yeah, so my question is actually for Harvey. You kind of identified the park as an attraction, and I kind of see how you would say that more towards like the time of the 60s, and you said that from the perspective of there was the music and the games and that kind of stuff. Can you truly say that the park is the same right now that it was in the 60s?
No, the park has been,
I don't want to be anywhere near the park from the standpoint of the crime.
yeah, the problem is that the university is neglected, as owner of the park, has neglected the park. Find me one spot on campus that looks like People's Park. You can't. You can find one park in Berkeley that looks like People's Park. A comparable park is Civic Center Park. Exact same size, 2.8 acres. Also surrounded by historic buildings, well maintained, used by high school students, used by other people. A few homeless people will hang out there. It's the site of the farmer's market. It has festivals. It's a vibrant place. That could be the future of People's Park. We don't want People's Park to look like it is now. Of course not.
In the back. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yes, you.
I have a question for Dan. You said that there's been a lot of money put into buildings and houses, and it's kind of sad to see people commute. But a big part of it is because university housing costs $23,000 a year. What do you think that money is ridiculous?
Sorry, wait, wait, hold on. When people started snapping, I couldn't hear what you said.
You said that you have a plan to build more housing, and it's sad to see a lot of people commute. But a big reason is because university housing costs $23,000 a year.
Thanks.
Why don't you make it cheaper?
Yeah, got it. So, first of all, it's a really good question. And it's a really important question about student housing. So first of all, the university addresses the cost of student housing not with the list price, because that would be inequitable. If we reduce the list price of housing in all residential facilities, we'd be subsidizing students from affluent families. And that's why financial aid is individuated for each student and their particular needs. And that's why housing costs the same in all of our residential facilities, because of equity and because we don't want to use precious resources to subsidize students who can pay the full ride. Having said that, it is absolutely evident that even with all that, and even though our student housing is below market, it's too damn expensive for too many students. And that's something that we have to confront. It's something we talk to the legislature about. It's something we're not happy about. It's not a status quo that we find to be satisfactory. 10% of our students do not have housing security. And at the same time, and I'll be really brief here, but happy to talk to you more about it, Housing is what's called an auxiliary to the university, and by law it has to stand on its own feet financially. The campus can't subsidize it. And so the rents it brings in has to cover the cost of the maintenance of the service and the construction and the debt on that construction. And that's what creates those crazy prices. Now, we believe it's still better than the open market, but we also understand we've got a lot of work to do on that front. And we can't proceed without the support and partnership of the state. We used to have it. Public universities in this state no longer do to the extent that we did, and it's a damn shame. And you're right.
Yeah, this question's for Dan. So you guys said that you're going to preserve 2/3 of the space for public space, open space. Currently, there's a lot of groups that come into the park that help feed the unhoused people that stay there. There are a lot of different groups that come in. Would those groups be allowed to continue that 2/3 space, or would that now be considered somewhat of a disruption to the student life that would be in that small?
Same thing. A public space is a public space, right? Now we have some of those groups are coming. Working with the local church, we spent $1.5 million to build a new daytime gathering center. Those groups are welcome there. I mean, this university has a long legacy of shouldering a significant amount of responsibility for unhoused and unhoused people in our society. We do that through the suitcase clinic, the School of Public Health. We do it with the social worker that we've hired. We've done it with the money we've recently spent. That's not going to change.
So the 2/3 space wouldn't have any stricter rules or conditions?
It would be just like the campus. I mean, the campus is an open campus. Clark Kerr is an open, right? It's open.
So my question is for Harvey. It's more of a personal question. How often do you use People's Park, and when was the last time you were there?
I was there 2 days ago. Yeah.
And how often do you use
And
it?
I, as a parent, I remember going through the park in better days, walking with my children, looking at the native plant garden, which was a collaborative project between the university and the park community. So it is possible for the university to work with the community to have a beautiful park. It's, again, 3 national nuclear laboratories, they can't maintain a park, So I don't want to see the park as it is. I want to see it restored. I want it to look like any place on this campus or any other park in Berkeley.
Before we take the last question, just a reminder that there's a Chris Kindness meeting, 6:30 tonight with pizza in 370 next door in Chew Hall. The guy way in the back, last question.
Dan, I have a question for you. First of all, thanks for speaking.
Hold on. Yeah.
Say you can frequently engage in the democratic process on the state level. To what extent have the people of People's Park and the community well known for being, I guess, against the interests of the state or at odds with the interests of the state within surveying certain democrats?
What's the question?
Have you gone to the people of People's Park and the community that's often at odds with the interests of the state? And I guess surveyed, taken, how many of them?
Yes, so first of all, we had graduate students that were in the park day after day talking to people.
Quiet. No, Deb, not you.
Oh, sorry. Talking about what they wanted and needed. We saw the poll. So the poll was 2-to-1 student support, but that means there's still about 30% of students who were opposed to what we're doing. That's why the plan was created the way it was created. That's why the chancellor shifted gears and said, you know what, we're not going to build until we can offer housing. We're not going to build until we can offer a new daytime gathering. So we're trying to do, I think, what people hope and expect from public institutions, which is not just have the tyranny of the majority, but also to be cognizant of and to respond to the interests and needs of all. Yes, there's some people who are unhappy, we understand that, but that doesn't mean that their interests have been disregarded.
Okay, if you have more questions, come on in. Big thank you to Dan.